Don't you think that in many of the holy books of our world, other than in Sufism, that a lot of women's input is missing?
Definitely. I mean, it's only been in maybe the last 30 years that women have been, women have realized this and how important it is that women become scholars or, pay attention to the sacred texts in whatever their tradition is and look in there for something that's going to be extremely meaningful to them or something that they realize could never have been the way that it's been presented to them, and that it needs to be looked at from a woman's perspective. I mean, for instance, in the translation of the Quran, we may get into this, but in chapter 4, verse 34, where it says, husbands who fear disobedience, they translate it, means resistance, but they translate disobedience, on the part of their wives, first admonish them, then abandon their sleeping places, then beat them. So this word, beat them, is a command in the Quran. Well, once I had finished the translation of the Quran, and I was going through it with a very critical eye, I came upon a verse. It's in chapter 2, verse 231, and it says, husbands who want to divorce their wives must do it honorably, and they cannot harm them. This verse has been in the Quran from the very beginning, but no one looked at it from a woman's perspective to suddenly say, wait a minute, a Muslim woman who is going to be divorced cannot be harmed, but a Muslim woman who wants to remain married does so under the threat of being beaten. Well, as a woman, I'm going to say, hey, give me a divorce. I don't want to be married. Yeah, so it goes against the whole concept of the Quran and the words of the Prophet to encourage marriage and discourage divorce. It does the opposite, which is the definition, by the way, of a hypocrite in the Quran, is to command somebody to what's wrong and prohibit them from doing what is right. So this is why women need to study their sacred texts and really look at them very, very carefully, because they will find that there are certain misinterpretations that have crept in that the sacred text may say something in the original, but how it's been interpreted by the male figures throughout these centuries is very different than when a woman looks at something.
When you talk about the Sunnah of the Prophet, explain that to our audience.
Well, that is the words and sayings of the Prophet that his companions. He had over 1,500 companions, and about 660 of them happened to have been women married to the men companions, or women on their own. And then within a couple of 100 years, these were all recorded as to so-and-so, the companion said that the Prophet said this, or at that time this verse was revealed. Many of them came from his wife, Aisha. She has over 2,000 traditions related from her as to what the Prophet said or did. So the Sunnah is the Prophet's sayings and what he did.
And this all came about in the oral tradition first.
Yes, it was all part of the oral tradition and then later codified.
You talk about the intent of the Quran. When you talk about that, is that you're looking at the translation based on the intent of how it was communicated, correct?
Yes.
Isn't that a intuitive thing to be listening for the intent of the Quran? I mean, you have to be intuitive to be listening for that, right?
Yes, that's true. But when the word, if you use the same word, which I did, if the context allowed, then, you see this kind of unity within the translation. That then you know that this word has to be that word because the context, it makes sense in that context, and it's been used, 10 other times in 10 other verses. It is a little bit intuitive, but it's also just kind of logical.
Is it fair to say, I'm not trying to do a soundbite here, but in a way, by doing the studious body of work that took you 7 years to get this communicated correctly, is it in fact then a repackaging of the words of the Prophet? Or is it a repackaging of the translation? It will be received as a repackaging by maybe a lot of men who liked or who were connecting to that other interpretation and the license to beat women.
They obviously don't agree. They still continue, but I have presented so many arguments on different YouTubes and in lectures and in debates and so forth, so that it's not going to be much longer that they're going to be able to resist. And also, in one case where a woman was in Buffalo, New York, she was trying to get custody of her children from a Muslim man, and she had been a convert to Islam. So she introduced the Sublime Quran into evidence to show that there is a different interpretation, that everybody's not on the same page. So just that in itself has been a great, movement forward, so that women are no longer beaten in the name of God. But the translation, Muslims believe that it's the word of God that was revealed to the prophet, and he recited it, and then scribes wrote it down because he himself was unlettered. So and it's only the Arabic that is considered to be the sacred text. Any translation or interpretation is considered to be just that, a translation or interpretation. For instance, in Congress, when the congressmen, take an oath to swear by, to follow the Constitution,
yes,
they're swearing on a translation of the Bible. And that would never do in the Islamic world. It has to be the original. So they need to swear on the Hebrew or the Greek of the original rather than on the English translation. In the same way, in the Islamic world, when you swear an oath, it has to be on the Arabic, not on the English translation or Swahili translation. Translation is just a translation. It's not considered to be the sacred. You don't get the same kind of blessings from reading it as you do if you recite or listen to the Arabic of the recitation. And Quranic itself, that word means recitation. So the oral tradition and the recitation of it and the listening to it in Arabic is how you receive the blessings.
Why is it that women's voices are not allowed or encouraged to recite the Quran? This is pretty profound.
Yes, it is. And women, in their different interpretations, but within the Middle East, women are not allowed to recite the Quran in public. But this is not the case in Malaysia and Indonesia and in the Far East. So they say that a woman's voice, because it's so beautiful and so forth, it's going to, men are going to be distracted by it. And so women can't do it. I mean, it's kind of a reverse psychology that the men are supposed to be able to control themselves. But because of the traditional psychology and how things developed, men were only able to control themselves if they controlled someone on the outside. And that happened to be, their wife or a woman.
This is not the first place that the holy books have been coveted and women have been uninvited to partake in the sacred text. In many traditions, this has happened across the world.
Yes.
In human history.
Yes.
I think it's true in Judaism. Women have had a very certain role. It wasn't until the last maybe 50 years that they were really allowed to be more involved in the sacred text.
Yes, that's true.
Including even being able to be rabbis.
Yes. Yeah, or the Catholic tradition or the Christian tradition. Same thing. I mean, St. Paul says in the New Testament, women are to be silent. They're not supposed to say anything. They're supposed to just, be quiet. So this has been the case for, I would say probably most religious traditions until you get into the mystical dimension, and then it becomes different.
Right. In the beginning of the book, you say, I'm not a feminist translator, but that there's been little attention given to women's points of view for 1,500 years. And my question to you is, why did you feel the need to say that?
Well, the feminist tradition is a Western tradition, and it certainly was successful and very good here in the West because we've seen how women's issues have moved more into the forefront. We're not quite there yet, but we're closer to it. Whereas that tradition doesn't exist within the Islamic world, and then you become labeled as someone who's been influenced by the West instead of someone who has arisen from within their own tradition. So within the Islamic tradition, we have a perfectly good example, which is called spiritual chivalry. And there, it's the whole goal of it is to become a fair and just person. So when you're fair and just, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. this is how you look at things in a fair and just way. And there are many in the cases of this tradition about